Hello, I'm Craig Constantine. Welcome. This is the Podcaster Community Show, short conversations that are not just about podcasting, because I like to take the scenic route. My guest today is Mary Hendra. Welcome, Mary. How are you this morning?
I am doing well. Thank you.
So we do the little discussion beforehand where we kind of figure out what kind of mood we're in and what we're talking about. And a lot of times when I ask people some preliminary questions to see what's on their mind, we end up talking about their stuff, the guests' stuff. And then you also had questions for me about my community building and, I don't want to put words in your mouth. So
Yeah.
maybe today an interesting thing to start with would be to talk about spaces that are like adjacent. So concepts that are adjacent to podcasting. Like, I don't think either you or I were starting a podcast because we wanted to podcast or to become, internet famous. We were
Yeah.
starting because we wanted to share. I started because I wanted to share conversations. I wanted to create conversation spaces with one other person and create a space for the guest. I'm so meta, even this podcast. And I'm wondering, I know that you took one of the Akimbo podcasting courses. That's how we know each other. And now it's been a few months, and now, to my delight, I'm just discovering that you're coming back to like, ooh, I think my podcast is now coming together. And I'm wondering if you can talk me through what are the things that drew you to podcasting? Like, what did you initially either want to share through podcasting, or what did you want to create for others by podcasting? Like, what was the thing that made you come into podcasting?
Yeah. Thank you also for inviting me to have this conversation.
You're very welcome.
I've been fascinated by podcasting for a while. I liked the form. I liked in some ways, the intimacy of voice, of listening to people, but also the conversations that, um, can be those conversations that almost like you're coming into somebody's living room and hearing them talk a little bit and then then
Mm.
stepping out in different ways. So I've been fascinated for a while and, tried to convince my former organization we should do a podcast, and it didn't go anywhere. And so with the Akimbo podcasting course, I thought, oh, what the heck? Like, I'm just gonna, I can make a podcast. Um, and after I had signed up, my future job actually said, "Oh, you could create a podcast for us." I'm like, okay,
Mm.
great. Day one to day two of the course, I realized I could not do that podcast during the course because I like hadn't even started with them yet. I didn't, and that needed to be collaboratively built. It will need to be
Mm.
collaboratively built. So I started thinking at that point, well, like, what could I do a podcast on now? And and instead of it being something that I wanted to share, it actually turned out to be something more that I wanted to learn, that I wanted to have conversations about. And that's play in professional spaces. And I did a lot of iterations on like what the title
Mhm.
would be, and I changed the title multiple times after having guests talk about it, because really, like, I wanted to talk with people um, who brought play into their professional spaces, in part because of the tension between, like, just the fun of play and the resistance from others saying, "Oh, if you want to succeed professionally, you have to be more serious, right? You need to, if you want this promotion, stop playing around so much, right? Like,
Mm.
there's so much of a dichotomy." So I wanted to learn.
How'd that work out? Like, have you
Fabulous.
started? I was gonna say, have you started doing those conversations and you just haven't released them yet? Do you want to say the name of the podcast, or you don't want to put that out in the public internet just yet?
um, so, so what I intend to have the podcast name be, if I don't have another, like, oh, I have to change it again, is Lead with a Dash of Play.
Hmm. It's a good name.
Yeah. Um, and the conversations have been fabulous. Everyone, and some people I had known a bit before, some people I had not known before, but doing the podcast interviews gave me like a reason to invite them to have that conversation,
Mm.
not just a like networking, get to know you conversation, but was like, can we really talk about play.
How do you
And
start those conversations? Like when when you rope them in or flying tackle them or sign them up or schedule them or
mhm.
whatever, how do you go from zero to like good, what we call good tape? If everybody listening is a podcaster, how do you go from zero to good tape?
It varies by the person. For some people, I started with the question that I then moved to the front if I didn't start with it, generally. And that's, when did you last play?
That's a good question, but that kind of puts people on the spot because I think most people go,
Well, think about it for a minute, right? For you, when did you last play?
oh, haha, I play every day. I have scaffolding on my patio. I just spent 5 days in just the other side of the Charles from Boston and in Boston at a giant parkour event. So I spent like 40 hours in the last 5 days, literally outside running and jumping and playing. So yeah, I'm
I
definitely,
love that. Well, and
definitely not
and
normal.
and and Craig, like for you, right? When you started answering that question instead of thinking in the meta of what it means, you smiled, you relaxed your shoulders a little bit, and you're like, "Oh yeah, I just played." And for a good number of my guests, like that's what happens because it actually breaks it out of a formal interview. Like, I'm interviewing you about this, like, how did you get into this? And what is your coaching like? Or what is your, what do you do? What's the last time, something
Mm,
happened? How do you define play? Right. Like, those are big, thoughty questions. But when did you last play? Like that's our body that responds, right? Because we have that visceral memory of when we played, whether it was with a child or it's outside or it was with paint. Right?
mm,
So it's just is fascinating, and it usually comes with a little smile. There was one person that I interviewed who was fascinating because for a living he runs games. Right, so I was like, okay, this is like this will be interesting, and he very specifically said, well, we should talk first and then decide whether I'm a good fit for your podcast. I'm like, great, because I wanted to talk with him anyway, and so we talked, and he said, I'm not a playful person. I was like,
mm.
you run games for a living. Tell me more about this. You have to be on my podcast. Um, so with him, I didn't start with that. I actually we did other things. We talked about some other things first. We talked about the company first, and for him, like, that was where he relaxed in. It was like, oh, it's not about me. Yeah, sure, I can talk about the company and I can
Mm.
talk about what we do and the activities and such. And then about halfway through, I said, so when we talked before this, you said you're not a very playful person. When did you last play? And then he laughed because he was, he'd gotten a little bit more comfortable. So then he laughed and he said, actually, I played this weekend. But now let me tell you about that. And it was it's a great question at that point. But if depending on the person, the interview needs to start in a different place.
Mm. I'm thinking about what we do as podcasters when we're in the people who are doing conversations, interviews, recordings, um, how we're trying to I'm going to presume presume good intent. Never use a long word when a diminutive one will suffice. I'm going to presume good intent and say that everybody out there uses their powers for good, and we're always trying to walk the line between what I want out of the conversation and what I'm trying to capture. Like, why are we even bothering to record, right? Why don't we just have cool conversations, Craig? Well, because I'm also trying to capture and share something with the people who I think are listening, if anybody listens. And I'm wondering, do you ever find that so there's like attitudes you can go in. You can be like, I'm just going to go in. I'm going to press the record button. I'm going to have a great conversation without really paying attention. The microphone tech becomes subconscious, and you can just ignore the making a podcast. And you just have a great time. You hit stop, and the magic trick worked again. Is one way to do it. Another way to do it is to try and be very mindful about like what's the energy level, and to sort of be more intentional about the activity that you're doing. And I often wander between the two because I struggle with, oh, maybe there should be a story arc. Maybe there should be a 3-part. Maybe I should be recording material, which I know I'm planning on cutting 1/4 of everything I record. And then the guests get even better stuff. Or sorry, the people listening get even better stuff from the guests. So I'm wondering, what is your experience like when you're in the moment having those conversations and you're recording? And assuming your experience is similar to mine and you're wandering between those two mindsets, like what's it like to be in those mindsets while you're trying to have those conversations?
Mm. I will say I don't usually go back and forth between the mindsets in the conversation, because for me, when I start in once I've started in on the conversation, I just love the conversation.
Mm,
And so I try to be 100% really listening to the person, listening at multiple levels, listening to their words, but listening to what's just beyond their words, listening for their energy level, their, you know, the emotion they're bringing to it, and really allowing us to go in those places. I tell my guests that ultimately the podcast will be probably about half an hour, but we'll likely talk for 45 minutes. And that gives a little bit of flexibility. So I do some editing, and let them know that that will be part of it. It gives some space for the conversation to go off topic a little bit and come back, and then for me to decide whether I use the off topic part or not. Right.
flip the whole thing over. The off-topic part is the on-topic part. It has to get deleted.
Exactly. So that, so it gives a little bit more space, for that. If the guest is someone that I didn't know as well before, then some of that beginning part might feel a little bit stiff in the end.
Mm,
And there are times where I guess at the end is where I allow my mind to come back to something. So there's one person I had this fabulous conversation that was very like on topic all the way through, but still really fun. And we got to half an hour and I was like, I'm not going to be able to cut any of this. Like, I'm just going to end because we're not going to, like, the more I go, like, that's going to be an
no.
hour long podcast. Um, and then there's another one where I came back to a question that I had asked in the beginning. I came back to it in a different way at the end, because I recognized how different the energy was there at the end, and that the response might be a little different.
Mm,
And I asked it in a little different way, so it wasn't 100% a repeat of the question, um, but it did give a different way to begin the conversation, or to begin the podcast, and
mm,
by recording something at the very end. And so like at that point, it's almost like we dive deep into the conversation and really go there. And then as we're coming out, that's when the second brain kicks in and says, okay, is there anything else I want to ask before I hit stop on the recording?
so many things spring to mind. Um, Turn signal for left turn. What's what's something that's really surprised you, like in the conversations? Like, so I'm assuming you've had lots of conversations, and now you're beginning to do them at a certain point in your life. You're beginning to do them by pressing record, which changes the environment. And I'm wondering what things that you have experienced within, maybe you don't notice it till you're doing the playback and the edit, but what things you've experienced now that you've been recording conversations, what have you been surprised about that's maybe been different to conversations you've had elsewhere and in other times?
Mm. So there's been one pleasant surprise, and that's that before doing the podcast, I loved uh, I loved doing panel moderation. Um, and which was something that I did sometimes do for my job, sometimes on stage, sometimes in a small setting, but not usually recorded. Although webinars during the pandemic shifted some of that, and so
Mm,
there was some interviewing or moderating people on webinars, but those had felt more akin to the in-person versions than to a podcast, right? At least in mindset. So one was a pleasant surprise in that the the enjoyment I get from interviewing people and moderating panels like translated really well to podcast. And so that was a nice surprise. And I think is why, like, I beforehand, I'm like, okay, is my mic set up and is my technology, and do I have all my notes? And literally have like my questions and my extras Google Doc of questions, and
And a
you know,
glass of water.
I got some water, you know, and I don't go overboard with questions, but I do have some core ones, and then I have some specific to the person that I prep beforehand. 90% of the time, once I start talking, like, I don't even look at any of those things, and I forget that the mic is there, or I forget to look at the sound volume. For like the first time I was watching, I had Audacity in the background so I could watch the sound volume while I was doing on Zoom. Um, Once I get into the interview, I just love interviewing and talking to people and having those conversations. So all of the other stuff kind of fades away. So that's
Mm.
been a nice surprise.
Yeah, podcasting is. I make the joke. People warn about rabbit holes. I'm like, no. The whole field is just rabbit holes. There's no field. It's
There's
all just holes because there's a million. I mean, just when you have something figured out, it's like, ooh, let's try two guests, or let's try my personal. I love to do podcast recordings in person. I have portable gear, and that's like I love it. And the conversations are, they're like regular conversations that you have with real people normally. So there's just so many things that you can get sidetracked on. So I definitely agree with you about it is nice to notice that I will say it's nice when I notice that I haven't wrecked conversation. In other words,
Yeah.
I, I say, when's the last time you had an awesome conversation? It was at your friend's house in the before times. At your friend's house on a Tuesday, you go over with your favorite beverage. You don't show up and say, like, I'm coming over at 3:00 and we're gonna be done by 3:45 and it's gonna
Yeah.
be awesome and we're gonna record. Like, that's not how you normally cultivate great conversation. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that, yeah, all that stuff didn't not only did it fall away for me, but it doesn't actually get in the way. If you just some bare minimum things, like if I'm in person, I give guests really comfortable, really good professional headphones. And the first time they approach the mic, they go, "Is this? Whoa, that's on! Oh my goodness!" And there's like 30 seconds I'm screwing around. But then afterwards, it's like they just take the mic with them because they can hear themselves. So there's some
Yeah.
little tricks, and I was always, I mean, now it doesn't surprise me anymore, but I was always surprised at like how quickly random people can fall into being comfortable with the strange parameters and constraints that we add to the mix by like
Yeah.
podcasting. So I just attribute that to like people are awesome.
Yeah. Nice experience from there. One thing I have discovered is I have a loud laugh for a microphone, and I'm still working on it because the first one that I recorded was with a woman I know who, she's hilarious. She's just hilarious. So we laughed so much during the podcast, which is really fun.
Mm,
And uh, the microphone just kind of blows up every time like
right.
when I have an unexpected laugh, then it's this like cackle almost. And so I've been trying to get better at leaning back when I start laughing, so that it's just a little, a little bit
I
easier.
turn to the
I don't know
side.
if you have any tricks on that.
I was going to say I turn to the side. So people who've been on virtual recordings with me and in real life, I do the same thing. I put the microphone on the right, like 30 degrees off to the right, so that if I go, I just miss the microphone with the air. And then if I'm going to laugh real loud, I'll just keep talking the same. If I'm going to laugh real loud, instead of laughing at the microphone, I'll do this and turn off to the side so you can hear how much the mic drops off just by me turning my
Yeah.
head away. So instead of laughing here, I will laugh over here, which takes a lot of the bang out of it.
Oh,
But in
that's a good
reality,
tip.
nobody cares, because when I put it in Hindenburg, the thing that I use, I just turn like, okay, this person clipped. Like, I'd rather have the person not slam into the ceiling with the recording, but if they do, there's a thing called a compressor, and we just turn that on. It's good enough.
Oh,
Mm, yeah. Cool. Well, as much as I hate to say it, well, how about this? We forgot to do this part. Where can people connect and reach out
yeah.
to you if they want to find more out about you? Where
Well,
can people reach you to find more about you? Jeez.
thank you. The easiest way is I do have a website. It's maryhendra.com. And my podcast eventually will be linked to that as soon as it releases. I'm hoping that Lead with a Dash of Play will release in July with
It's
music that
July
a friend of
1st.
mine, I know, I
I'm just
know.
saying for those listening, it's July 1st, so that's a challenge for yourself.
It is a challenge. And it's not entirely out of my control because I'm waiting for a friend who is writing the music, and I am so thrilled that he and his music will be part of the podcast. That if it takes until August, it takes until August. Um, but I think it's getting close. So if I do, get the music, and I would love for it to come in July, but maryhendra.com will have the links to that. It also has, I call it my playground. It's like it literally on the website, it says playground, and it's like what's going on, what I'm doing. I always like to do some free events, and then I run cohort experiences that have a dash of play in them. So they are fun ways to recenter on who we are, which is one of the things I believe play does, is allows us
Mm.
to really be our authentic selves, and it allows us to step back with curiosity so that we can lean back in to society and re-engage with where we want to go with greater clarity.
Terrific. Has become my catchphrase, I think, because it's true.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for taking the time this morning, Mary. It was a pleasure. We've talked briefly before, but this was really cool to get a chance to sit down, stand up. I'm standing, you're sitting, 20 minutes of little bite-sized conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you.